Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a really compelling argument made by commentator Dan Bongino. We're going to look at how he connects the dots between three major issues: immigration, crime, and American foreign policy. So this right here, this is where his entire argument is headed, a really strong statement on foreign policy. But how exactly does he get to this point? Let's back up and trace the steps he takes to build his case. All right, so argument number one. It all kicks off right at the U.S. border. The whole foundation of his case is built on this very direct and pretty controversial link between immigration policy and crime rates here in the country. At the heart of it is this idea he presents, a distinction between what he sees as preventable crime versus unpreventable crime. He argues that any crime committed by an undocumented immigrant is basically a failure of border policy. He frames it as something completely different from domestic crime, which he says, that's a job for local police. For him, the border isn't just some line on a map or a suggestion. Nope, he sees it as a firewall. And its main purpose, in his view, is to act as a filter against what he considers existential threats, everything from al-Qaeda terrorists to powerful CJ&G cartel members. So he lays out this super clear step-by-step logic. It's a pretty simple three-step formula. First, you identify what he calls the low-hanging fruit. Second, you use Title VIII for quick deportations. And the direct results, he claims, a massive drop in the national crime rate. And this is the big payoff, right? The so what of his three-step plan. He directly connects this specific immigration strategy to what he calls the safest America you've ever lived in, across the board, from murder rates to property crime. And he wraps up this first point by drawing a really sharp political line in the sand. As you can see, he's framing the choice for voters as essentially a direct vote for or against the power of the cartels. Okay, so he's connected immigration and crime. Now, for his second argument, he pivots and starts talking about the cartels themselves and how that threat, it's totally changed. Basically, he's arguing that the way we used to think about cartels, all about just brutal physical violence, that whole idea is completely outdated, and dangerously so. The threat today, as he describes it, is way more sophisticated. It's a high-tech challenge where data can be just as dangerous as a weapon. I mean, just look at the kind of gear he's talking about here. We're not talking about your typical criminal hardware. He's painting a picture of a paramilitary force, complete with armored vehicles, rocket launchers, and high-tech surveillance. It sounds a lot more like a rogue army. And all this technology, in his view, it's a massive force multiplier. It's what elevates the threat from just a local problem to a full-blown national security crisis. It scales up the potential damage, as he claims, from deaths in the hundreds to the thousands. All right, so now that he's established this idea of a high-tech paramilitary cartel, we get to his third and final argument, how a very specific foreign policy is designed to counter it. Okay, to really get what he's saying here, we gotta do a super quick history refresh on something called the Monroe Doctrine. He brings up this really old policy, which is all about opposing foreign interference in the Americas, and uses it as the blueprint for what he calls the Don Roe Doctrine. But he gets what you might be thinking. Is this all just tough talk for a political rally, or is it a real, actual policy that would be put into action? And his answer is incredibly clear. This is not a joke to him. He argues that in a world where cartels have advanced drone technology and other countries could pose new kinds of threats, this doctrine is a deadly serious commitment. And then he offers this up as concrete proof. He points to the takedown of cartel leader El Mino, an operation he says had U.S. support, and presents it as a real-world example of this doctrine actually working. So let's take a step back and look at the whole argument he's built here. What are the main pillars that are holding this entire thing together? As you can see, it's really a chain of logic. It all starts with strict immigration enforcement, which he says will cause domestic crime to plummet. That's then justified because, in his view, the cartels have become this huge, high-tech paramilitary threat. And the final piece? A hardline foreign policy to stop those threats from ever getting a foothold in the hemisphere. And that leads us to our final question for you to think about. When you take these issues that are often debated separately, immigration, crime, foreign policy, and you weave them all together into a single, interconnected national security threat, how does that fundamentally change the whole political debate around each one of them?